Another parable of Jesus, which is offered to us, or is it? Notice it begins by describing who this parable is for. Is it for you? Jesus told this parable to those who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and regarded others with contempt. Is this parable for you? Or should we finish now and I can sit down? It's given to those who thought of themselves as righteous and had contempt for others. Let's talk about it anyway, shall we? I think in this parable where we have this painting that Jesus offers of two individuals praying, a Pharisee and a tax collector. And often, I used to tell children with parables, I would ask them to imagine what it looks like and then draw a picture of what that looks like. And really, parables were supposed to be this powerful way of helping people to remember the lesson, but also to enter into the lesson more deeply. Because there are many ways of teaching, and Jesus could have taught by simply giving a law and saying, this is the law. Be humble and be nice to others. Just do that. But instead, Jesus paints a picture. He tells a story. And it's much harder to forget a picture or a story than just a simple law. It's easy to forget the law. We do it all the time when we drive on the highway, right? It's harder to forget when you see a picture of a fatal accident associated with the law or breaking of the law. That's why they have those pictures on cigarette packages, right? Rather than just the words. Images, they stay with us and they engage us. And that's the point of the parable. We're still talking about it today. There's a mystery to it. And we are invited to enter into it in some way and say, yes, this is for me also. We have a Pharisee and a tax collector. Now, instead of a Samaritan, which are often the bad people used as a surprising example of goodness in other parables that Jesus offers, this time Jesus uses the example of a tax collector, another bad person by society standards, who surprisingly becomes an example of grace and God's presence. Now, the point of this parable is not for us to in some way demonize the Pharisee or to elevate the tax collector and say, well, I just have to be more like the tax collector, and thank God I'm not like the Pharisee, right? Well, if that's our takeaway, then we've just entered into this story, and it's precisely for us. Because what was the prayer of the Pharisee? Thank God I'm not like this one. The point of the parable is humility. It's the attitude of the heart. The point of the parable is to remember how to not only engage in prayer, but engage ourselves and engage one another in this world. The Pharisee, with all his good works, could have also been justified at the end of his prayer. But he would just have to adjust his own attitude of his heart. It's not his good works that led him not to be justified at the end. It's his attitude in the midst of his good works. He could have simply prayed a genuine, humble prayer. God, thank you for this tax collector who is also here praying to you. He would have been justified. He didn't have to change his life, change his good works. It was the attitude of the tax collector, not his actions, that are to be elevated and followed. What is it about humility that is so powerful in our daily life? Jesus says this divine reversal, the principle of the gospel, is repeated over and over again in Mary's Magnificat. The lowly will be elevated, and those who are high will be brought low. Again, Jesus says at the end of this parable that this man went home justified rather than the other. All who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all who humble themselves will be exalted. What is it, practically speaking, what is it to live a humble life? Why is it so essential? I think it's because it allows us to view ourselves and the other with the eyes of our loving God, and to feel ourselves and the other with the heart of a loving God. To live in humility is not in some way to diminish ourselves or to make ourselves feel less than. But humility ultimately is perfect honesty, truthfulness, being able to say that, yes, I have received much, but I have also so much to offer. Every once in a while, I find that I am surprised by where I encounter God in the most unexpected places. And how do I know that I encounter God? Usually for me, it manifests itself in the way I feel. When I am moved, emotionally moved, in a beautiful way, to tears, when I feel something that makes me want to be more and be better, that's when I know I'm encountering grace. And you know, sometimes I encounter grace, as I said, in the most unexpected place. Sometimes on Facebook, I encounter God. Sometimes with these stories about people who share their experience of their own life. I remember watching this story about contestants on one of those singing shows, The Voice or America's Got Talent or something like that. I remember this family of 5 or 6 children, and most of them were adopted by these young people who just wanted to give a good home to someone else. And I watch that and I think to myself, these people are so much better than me. And I'm a priest. Finding grace in the most unexpected places, recognizing the goodness that exists even outside of myself, being elevated by the example of another. Another example, there are these stories about a famous actor, Keanu Reeves, as the nicest man in Hollywood. He's labeled the nicest man in Hollywood because there are these random photos and videos of him just sitting with the homeless, or spending his birthday by buying a cake and then eating it with the homeless outside, or giving gifts to stunt people on his sets just because he feels they're underpaid. Little things, and I watch that and I see it, and I think to myself, I don't know what he believes, I don't know what church he goes to, but I know that I wish I was that good. It elevates me, it gives me hope. The example of kindness and goodness, which is always accompanied by humility, rather than thinking I deserve, it's all me. And I really think that in this parable, that justification that Jesus speaks of, that goes to the tax collector, is simply a natural result of a humble attitude. And it's available to everyone. Humility as an attitude of the heart that is supposed to direct our prayer and our life, how we engage this world, can be had by both the rich and the poor, the wealthy and the unwealthy, the religious and the non-religious. Everyone, through humility, can experience grace, which really is the fulfillment that we all long for, the happiness, the joy, the peace. It begins with humility, and it can lead us to an incredible life and experience of goodness that surrounds us. As St. Catherine of Siena once said, the great spiritual mystic, we are swimming in grace. We just don't always see it. And so my prayer for us as we see this beautiful painting, this picture, this parable of two individuals praying, and through humility one receives the gift of satisfaction, justification, joy, and peace. May we also have that gift in our lives. Amen.